Hi there, this is Juan Mario Gutierrez. I'm the director in Cajoyalí in Colombia. We are in different regions here in our country, and one of them is this jungle, this incredible jungle where we deal with spectacular camps, joining with the nature. And today I want to tell you about the ICF Congress, the ICC, where I was welcomed in the first time in 1998, and since then I always go. Why? Because doing what we do is kind of being crazy, and camp director needs to find his way, his professional way. Once I went to the ICC, I found that there is many people around the world doing the same thing as I do. They all think crazy stuff to make kids learn, enjoy, and be part of our world as really world citizens. So there in the ICC, I found my partners, people that do things that I do. And I found the reason what I like being a camp director and what I like about being part of this incredible fellowship. So don't miss it. Don't miss to be there in Tarragona in Spain in the ICC. I'll be there.
Welcome everybody to another ICF Academy. I'm your host, Gabrielle, and also your presenter for today. Simon, please feel free to put up the slides when you're ready. And I'm excited to talk to you about a couple of things. But first and foremost, we want to talk about your Zoom settings, especially important for today because we have different speakers that are using different technologies, so we want to make sure that we're focusing on those particular speakers. But before we get to that, my co-presenters for today is Beth Allison and Jorgenson, or Jorgi. I'd like to talk a little bit about Beth. For some of you that may not know Beth, Beth is one of our co-hosts for the podcast Camp Code, along with Ruby. And I met Beth, I was trying to do that calculation, I believe 24 years ago at the Ontario Camp Association conference. And I remember that I was in one of those sessions. I wasn't particularly a fan of the speaker. And I remember thinking, well, at least I got one thing out of it. And I actually got more than one thing. Beth had asked so many great questions that I got 5 things leaving that session. She's passionate about leadership and she's passionate about community. And what I've learned from Beth is that if you lead with intention and you bring community together, that's part of the magic of camp. And it's always been a pleasure to work with Beth, and I always learn from her. And we're really grateful to have you here, Beth. Jorgi, as a lot of you know, past president of ICF and all around ambassador of international camping and the work that we do, is somebody that sparked magic for me when he started to lead games. And I think that camps sometimes are seen as just a place where kids can have fun. And I like to say, absolutely. And when they're having fun, they're learning those life lessons. And with Jorgi, every single time I have so much fun, and then I go home and about 3 days later, I go, I just learned a life lesson. And that is one of Jorgi's absolute magic powers that he has. And so for today, we're specifically going to be speaking about community, staff, and how to bring people together, especially after 3 years of what has been very difficult for everybody, but particularly our young staff members and our campers. And so for today, our time together, Beth and myself will be really focusing on staff training. Beth is going to kick us off with what's going on out there, and I'm going to chat about what can we do about it. There's also going to be a 15-minute question and answer period. So please do write down your questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor so we can answer as many as possible. Then followed by camp games, aka life lessons and community building with a Jorgi of 20 minutes and a 10-minute session. These are loose times. They might go a little bit longer, but we like setting goals for ourselves that are not realistic. Next slide, please. That's that. So without further ado, I'd like to give a warm ICF Academy welcome to Beth Allison. Please hop on the stage.
Good morning from Canada. What a pleasure it is to be here with you today, talking about things we need to acknowledge for our staff training this year and moving forward. Before we begin, I would like each of us to take 2 minutes and jot down some notes about any issues that we had pertaining to staffing this past camp season. I won't be asking you to share them all. I just want each of us to take the time to bring to mind some of those concerns, whether they were big or small, the ones that caused us grief and frustration and concern and stress with our staff. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do that, and I'm going to set a timer right here to make sure we have 2 minutes. So here we go. All right, that was my timer going off. So 2 minutes. I'm sure had I given you more time, you could have written a few more things. In the chat, please, could you enter just a few words or one word or a phrase? What was your biggest frustration with staffing this past summer? Your biggest frustration? Burnout. Yep. Not enough staff. Yes. Last minute cancellations. Yes, working long hours as if they've forgotten how long they're supposed to be at camp. Transportation, interesting. Okay. Being aligned with the mission. Yep. Strong reactions. Yes, Gab, a lot of that we're seeing. Working for money rather than mission. Okay, that's changed, hasn't it? For some. Okay. Everything that's been said above. Yes, perfect. So all those kinds of things, yes, new staff and a lack of confidence. I think that's important. So thank you for sharing those. What I would like to do is I would like to talk a bit about why some of these things are happening. So I've been doing a lot of thinking about our staff these past few years. I've heard from camp directors all over the world who have recently experienced very similar situations and dilemmas. And in order to do our jobs to the best of our ability and to stay true to our mission, I think we need to take some time to explore further and do our best to discern what's behind some of these behaviors. And I have 4 thoughts for you this morning. Number 1, we are all dealing with unprocessed trauma. It is no small thing what we've all endured. These past 3 years have really taken their toll. The pandemic has surely been one of the most traumatic collective events of our lifetimes. 3 years, over 6 million deaths, and it's still unclear when the pandemic will end. What is clear, experts say, is that the trauma may have a long-lasting impact. And I believe that so many of us have yet to deal with it. Countless have lived in fear, with illness, in isolation, and we've all lost so much. Some of us have lost loved ones, others jobs, some social circles, time, important milestone celebrations, opportunities to grow socially and practice those important life skills. It's a massive weight carrying all of these losses. And this sprawling, unprocessed trauma chews away at our brains in myriad ways that make us anxious about why we can't seem to live our lives as instinctively or energetically or joyously as we did in 2019. And while we're doing our best to just survive and live on autopilot, we have all been witness to this intense push to return to normal. And it feels like our world has just tried to suppress and move on, to pretend we're back to normal when there is so much unprocessed about what has happened both at the individual and the societal level. So let's think for a moment about the effects of trauma. Chronic stress, heightened fear, increased irritation, exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, agitation, numbness, a constant feeling of being on edge, loneliness, anger, self-destructive actions. Any of these sound familiar with some of what you witnessed with staff last summer? Trauma can change the way that we think, feel, and act for a long time. It changes the brain and our perception of everything, and it destroys our confidence. These past 3 years have been exceptionally trying on mental, physical, emotional, social, spiritual health, and most of us are just drained. Just pre-pandemic, I attended several conferences worldwide and ran sessions with Gabrielle, specifically dealing with the changes to staff's mental health that our industry was already experiencing. The collective trauma of the pandemic has added another layer of intensity to it. And then we ask our staff to deal all day with campers who have also not processed the prolonged trauma that they're experiencing. So how long can we carry this unconscious trauma? Will folks just crash and burn? Some are already at a breaking point. And yes, we have folks who seem to be coping really well. Those resilient young people who have great supports at home, at school, and in their communities. But being resilient through all these last few years have brought with them is still unquestionably, utterly exhausting. Point number 2, our staff are simply overwhelmed. See point number 1. When I interviewed some people recently, here is what they had to say. Pre-pandemic seems like a whole other life, like we're different people. I still get nervous around a crowd of people and find making conversation in a group exhausting. Weird, right? If someone says they're making 5-year goals, I'm incredulous. Literally anything can happen in a year. I feel stuck in an endless pattern of having no confidence in a secure or pleasant future. I am just more awkward socially than I was before the pandemic. I find it so unnerving to always expect the unexpected, to realize how unpredictable and uncontrollable life is. This feeling shows up in weird ways during seemingly normal times for me, like when I'm out in public or transitioning back into a normal work environment or traveling. Spending long periods of time away from home is now particularly more challenging for me than it used to be. And this one really got me. The world is hurting, but we're just too tired to do anything about it. And let's remember, the pandemic turned the world of online devices into an absolute necessity. Even though students have long since returned to school and most jobs have returned to the office, globally, our online screen time has barely decreased at all since the lockdowns have ended. That's fascinating. Our young adults have become completely dependent on crowdsourcing answers to all of their questions. What do you folks think I should do about this problem? How should I handle this situation? Are you dealing with this too? They put it out into the metaverse and get responses back from literally all over the world. If they need quick answers, Google is their go-to. Our cell phones have become the place from which we source so many of our answers, our news, our relationships, and then staff arrive at camp, and for exceptionally good and necessary reasons, most of us take that safety net away. We ask them to put that extension of themselves that has for many been one of their only sources of connection through lockdowns and quarantine that they've become completely and totally dependent upon, even more so than they were before the world shut down. Point number 3. Our staff have, and rightly so, trust issues with people of authority. Think about it. In addition to a worldwide pandemic that has been mishandled so incredulously, our last few years have been highlighted by natural disasters, terrifying effects on climate change, war, poverty, school shootings, increased racism, protests for the protection and promotion of human rights, political polarization, profit over people, and the list goes on. Our young people are finding it difficult to trust our governments, our police forces, our politicians, pretty much anyone in positions of authority. They feel as though so many have let them down when it counted most. And some of them feel that COVID revealed a brokenness that was always there, a refusal to do the right thing for others, and a sense that the cavalry isn't coming and they're on their own. Now, my third point has a second part. So the T also stands for time, trust and time. As we already discussed, some are feeling like the pandemic robbed them of a lot of time they'll never get back, years of youth, milestones and experiences that were stolen from them. Many are experiencing the feeling that nothing really lasts, and this affects people in different ways. Some really lean into it, and it gives them a sense of freedom and the willingness, almost a necessity, to throw caution to the wind and to sample all life has to offer. And others are struggling just to cope. They have this debilitating fear that everything could end at any moment. I might do that sometime has become, I need to do this now. I need to get out there and soak up as much of life as I can because it all could be gone in a heartbeat. So this desire to experience more of life has meant many simply cannot commit to a whole summer at camp or to seeing themselves return year after year after year like they used to. There is this innate need to experience more of life before it's too late. And this in itself has caused us new staffing challenges. Well, that is a pretty heavy start to a webinar about staff training, indeed, but these are all really important aspects to consider when putting together your staff training schedule, your topics, the layers of support that you're going to put into place for your staff throughout the season and beyond, because we're camp people, so our care for our people doesn't end when the season does. My first 3 points, Gab will address in our next section with ideas on how we can tackle these issues, best develop our staff and strengthen their skill sets. But before we get to Gab's, I have one very more important point for you. We cannot get to where we need to be if we don't shift our thinking. We too are exhausted. We're drained. We're dealing with unprocessed trauma. We're overwhelmed. And the go-to feeling that often arises when we ourselves are struggling is that of defensiveness. I know so many directors who are already gearing up for the staff problems they anticipate this summer. They're donning their armor, ready for the fight. Instead, let's all see this not as problems we need to solve, but rather as opportunities we get to help our staff and make a positive difference to this hurting world. We need to dig deep and find empathy for our people. It's been a long, hard few years, and the ramifications of which we'll be dealing with for many seasons to come. So instead of, I have to manage this staff crisis, let's try, I get to. Encourage, motivate, care for, inspire, empower my staff. It is my honor and my privilege to serve in this industry. Our staff are absolutely desperate to feel joy and spontaneity again, to experience connection and true growth, to fulfill their purpose and thrive, and I get to guide them on this journey. We are camp people, and we've thought that way for decades and centuries. But I think we just need a little reminder. So as we hire, as we prepare for staff to arrive, as we plan for staff training, let's remember they're dealing with unprocessed trauma, they're overwhelmed, they have issues with trust and time, and we need to shift our thinking. So our job then is to connect the dots. And who does connection better than camp people? Nobody I know. So now I'm going to turn you over to Gabs to help you with the how.
Thank you so much, Beth. As usual, I learned so much from you, and I love the connect the dots, because I'm going to talk about a little bit today about a program where we had campers that, they're 12, 13 years old, and they weren't coming back to camp. There was a dip, and our camp goes until about 15 years old. And they weren't crying. They seemed to be having a good time, but we just knew that there was something that was missing. And so we came up with a diagnostic tool that you might be using as well at home. We call it the trifecta. So it truly is a triangle. And the goal is to assess to see if every camper has had the opportunity to connect to themselves, to others, and to camp. So our staff were charged with assessing, do our campers feel proud of themselves? Are they setting goals and reaching them? Are they making friends? Are they connecting with staff members? And are they having an experience that they can't get at home? Are they connecting to camp? And so when we developed this program, we of course had to create time for our staff members to reflect, and we had to adjust our schedule a little bit. And what came out of this program was that we realized for staff training, we had to help staff connect to themselves, to others, and to camp during staff training and during the summer. And when Beth is talking about connecting the dots, when it comes to camp, there's many areas on camp that staff members need to feel like they are part of something special, that they belong. And sometimes you can't just tell by their faces. Sometimes you can really tell by their faces, but sometimes you can't tell by their faces on how they're doing. So I want to talk about all the way before we get to even staff training, when we get to the interview portion, when we are actually hiring staff. And we know that hiring staff is actually the start of staff training. And with the time where we are looking for staff and it's hard to get staff, sometimes what we want to do is we want to help them, love camp. And we want to tell them all the wonderful things about camp. But the reality is that what we need to do is give them some agency. Now, these are what I like to look at as two basically cliffs that are facing each other. And in between that is a very big gap. Whenever you start a new experience, you have your own expectations in your head, and you have all these wonderful ideas. For staff members, it might be, I'm going to make my best friends. I'm going to get to go and get a tan. I'm going to make a difference in a child's life. I get to go swimming. I'm going to learn how to rock climb. My parents are going to be proud of me. And we have all of these expectations. What we want to, when we're in the interview process, is we do not want to convince anybody to work within our organization. We want to lessen the gap between reality and expectation, so that when they're swinging from their expectation, the ideas in their head of what it's going to look like, they don't smack hard into reality. There'll be a little bump, but we don't want them to smack hard. So the first step is being as transparent as possible and telling them in that interview that this is not a place where you want to convince them to come to camp. This is a place where you want to inform them as much as possible about camp so they are making the right decisions for themselves this summer. And that's a little scary because we need staff. But how many of us have lost staff? This is a way to prevent that loss of staff. Now, the other piece that's extremely important is questions. Staff members have a lot of questions, but they don't always feel comfortable coming with questions. So before the interview, it's important to ask them to either look at your website or read your staff manual if you have it available in a small document, and to come prepared with 5 questions. This is really important because 1, it teaches them that it's okay to ask you questions, and 2, you're still lessening the gap between expectation and reality. Now, some of the staff members will ask very surface-like questions, like, "Oh, should I be bringing a raincoat?" And they don't get deep. I always like to push a little bit at the end and say, "Come on, you have a question that you don't think you should ask me. Ask me that question. I love to hear it." This is also very telling for me what type of questions they're asking. If it's all about making friends, is this the best place for them this summer? If it's only about their fears, then this might be an anxious person, and maybe we need to help them through that anxiety. But teaching them to ask questions is extremely important. And that goes on. We're going to be dealing a little bit with that unresolved trauma of processing some of that information and overwhelmedness. Now, lastly, before they come to camp, what would be helpful, and something that I found actually to be quite helpful, is to have what we like to call welcome chats. Welcome chats is a returning staff member that chats with a new staff member and answers any questions that they might have. So 1, that person has a buddy before they come to camp. 2, returning staff members feel a sense of responsibility. And so when they do come to camp, they know that this is the person they need to look out for. The 2 pieces of information we ask our staff members that are talking to the new staff member is 1, make sure they are speaking more than you. So you do have to come ready for questions. It's about getting to know each other. So make sure you're asking more questions than they are. 2, when they do ask questions, make sure you have at least 1 question that I want to know about, that you found interesting when you're answering it. So we want those people that are doing the welcome chats to communicate back to us about some of the things that they talked about during the welcome chat. That's everything that some of these things that we can do just before they come to camp. And what have they done? They've built community. They've learned that it's okay to come forward. And they also know that they can trust you because you're going to tell them, yes, there is bugs at our camp, and no, they don't go away, and no, your bug repellent will not work very well. We just want to let you know that. So they have arrived at camp, and you've done all the things. You have the name tags. It's looking great, and we're very excited. What's one of the first things that you can do? Well, there's so many, and Jorgi's going to talk about some games, but I want to talk about 2 specific things. 1, I want to talk about that change is part of our history. We want all staff members to know that our organization is always about our mission, and that we will make changes every year so we can get closer to that mission, and that we stand on the shoulders of the people before us. And because of the work that they did last year and the years before, we can get even closer to our mission. I like bringing all of our staff to the beginning of our camp, which is where our highway starts. There's our camp arches. It's a very humble sign that says Camp Waro. We put a ribbon around it, and I ask a new staff member, somebody that seems to have made some great connections during the first couple of days of staff training. I hand them the scissors, and they cut the ribbon. And after they've cut the ribbon, I say, once we go underneath these arches, Nobody here is a new staff. We are all part of the Waro family, which is the name of my camp. This is very, very important to understand that with a group of people that have been going through change in the past couple of years in a way that has been very unpleasant, our change is a goal to create a space where campers feel like they can be themselves. That's our mission. And so that helps us give us another little tick to trust. We're letting them know that we're going to do change, but we're doing it because we're trying to create a safe space for them, and we're trying to create a safe space for our campers. And that's the collective goal that we're all trying to achieve throughout the summer. That ribbon is also cut up into little pieces, and then you can wear it as a bracelet for the rest of staff training. In the first 72 hours of staff training, I like to give staff members all a little cue card, which is just a little piece of cardboard. And they have 2 questions that I ask them to fill in. One, what do they feel proud of since they've arrived at camp? And this is within the first 3 days or 2 days of camp. So what am I proud of? And then 2, what am I confused about? And they have to put their name, very important. And then I read them. I let them, if it's a large staff, you can say these are the 5 people that are going to read the cue cards. If it's a smaller staff and you can handle it, then you could read the cue cards, but you let the staff members know that these cue cards will be read. And then I categorize them. As I read them, I look at who do I need to speak to first. A couple of years ago, one of my staff members wrote with the confused piece, she wrote, I don't know the title of my job, which she clearly was told what her title of her job was, but this was something that she obviously missed. And so that became a fairly quick conversation I wanted to have with her. Another staff member, their grandparent was very ill and said, I don't know when I'm allowed to go home to see my grandparent, who's very, very ill. That person I put at the top of the pile to make sure we were making sure they're being taken care of. And in other staff members, I could see that maybe there were some sessions that didn't really make sense. And so I could see, oh, we might need to adjust some of our content here. The proud piece is a very neat gauge to see how are staff members adjusting to camp life. What do we want to focus on? It's also a way of practicing perspective. And when we practice perspective, that's another way of dealing with trauma. When you're able to reflect on yourself and say, I'm doing a good job. I took a shower today. I'm proud of that. Even that is helpful. These cards have been extremely helpful for me in building connections with my staff, which I will put on the trust link, and talking to every single one about those cards. There's one little piece that's left about these cards that's really important, which is the confused part. When I talk to them, I say, when did you start to realize you were confused or overwhelmed? And they'll say, a day ago, or before I came to camp. And then I ask, what stopped you from coming forward? And then they say, I thought you were too busy, or I didn't think it was that big of a deal. This is where we can say, I would love to hear from you more. It's important because you matter. It is a big deal. And so let's try to lessen that gap between when you realize you're overwhelmed or confused and ask the questions. At our camp, asking questions and asking for support is part of being a leader. And so that little piece is a way of telling our staff members, this is important, because we know that staff members, what happens when they arrive at camp, they're very excited. And then things start to happen. The reality starts to set in. And the more they can share their reality and the more we can make minor adjustments, the better our staff members are going to build trust with us. And we're going to avoid some of those big reactions that some of us have experienced in the past couple of years. I know I have experienced some big reactions in the last couple of years. So we've done interviews. Now they're at camp, but what about the learning? What about the training aspect? This might scare some of you, and that's okay. We're going to do it together. But I strongly, strongly believe that in every session, speakers should only speak 15 minutes or less. And camp directors, I know we love to talk. We're very good at it, but staff members cannot retain information after 15 minutes of talking. Beth and I were very intentional about making sure she would speak for 15. I would try to speak for 15, but 15 minutes is really important. Now you're saying I'm only supposed to do 15-minute sessions. No, you're only supposed to speak for 15 minutes at a time and then do a group discussion or an activity that has to do with the information or a mini fill in the blank information sheet and then come back to talking. But the 15 minutes has changed the way our staff have learned over the past 10 years. It has forced me to simplify my content and provide experience. So if this is overwhelming, choose 5 sessions that you're going to really focus on trying to make sure it is nice and clear, and your expectations are 2 things. This is what I want you to know, and this is what I want you to do with that information. That is our goal. And so for activities, simple group discussions, throw in a conversation. But in your group discussion, do a think, pair, share, which is what teachers do quite often these days, which is brilliant, where you ask a question and the staff member writes down their answer, and then they're buddied up and they talk about their answers, and then they get into another group, maybe 5 or 8 people, and they all share their information. Now, tip point here, in this portion, you have the opportunity as the instructor to ask the larger group, once you get to the share portion right here, once you get to the share portion, you can say, please share with me something you found interesting that somebody said in your group. And then I could say, I really liked what Beth talked about in that last piece, shifting our thinking. And what does that do? Well, it allows our staff to start to build trust with one another, and it starts to help them feel seen. If somebody says something nice to me, I'm starting to feel like I'm part of a team. It also helps people to pay attention and listen to other people. So a simple group discussion, you can do a think, pair, share. And the last question, when you ask the group, tell me something you found interesting that one of your teammates said. You're getting so much positiveness that's happening. At the end of your sessions, have you ever asked, does anybody have questions? And then nobody has questions. And then the next day, when you need to do the thing, nobody really knows what they are doing. I have had also this experience. If you have not, congratulations, you are amazing. At school, when we are asked, does anybody have a question? It is a norm of the group to look around and say, I don't want to look silly here, or I don't want to keep the group longer. And so we learn to not ask questions, or just some people need a little time to think. So at the end of a session, I always like to say, ask one question that you have about what we just talked about. Write it down. They have to write it down. So that means they're doing critical thinking, looking back at the information, and then they're asking their question. Now, what do they do with that question? Well, you could answer those questions, or you could go to a think, pair, share. They've thought about the question, they talk it over, they try to solve it, and then they could go to a larger group and they can say, this is what we solved, or this is what we didn't solve. What are we learning here? We're learning that we're practicing asking questions. We are practicing asking other people, and together we are problem solving. So we're already with our team developing problem solving and we are developing teamwork. Now, this is something that is easy and simple to do, but we don't always build time to do that within our sessions. That's why this year for us, we have started doing 5 hours of online paid training so that we can open up some time during our staff training to make sure that we have these reflections. And these trainings that we're doing could be 3 hours, it could be 1 hour. Just think what you could do with 3 blocks of 20 minutes at camp during your staff training. If you can do some things online before staff members come, or if you could afford to have an extra day, but not add extra sessions and just create experiential moments, this is not only going to help build team with your staff, but it's actually going to help them retain the information. And one of the things that comes with confidence or a lack of confidence in connecting to self is not learning, and just listening contributes to not learning. So doing things contributes to our self and feeling good about what we're doing. Here's an activity that you can do to help people feel good about themselves if they have no camp experience. I'd like you to get a bunch of circles, cut them out, a yellow one and a blue one. And on the yellow one, that's going to represent a flashlight. On the blue one, it's going to represent a shadow. And so what I want your staff members to do is to take a marker and on the yellow one, the flashlight, write down the type of camper that you are drawn to, that you walk towards, that maybe other people might have a hard time with. My example is kids that have a lot of energy. I love walking towards kids that have a lot of energy. They might overwhelm some people, but I know what to do with those kids. My shadow is campers that are kind of sassy, that don't really like camp, that are too cool for school. I like those kids, but I'm sometimes a little bit nervous around them. That would be my shadow. So the game is flashlights and shadows, and you walk around the entire staff with a blue dot and a yellow dot representing your flashlight and your shadow, the campers you're drawn to and the campers you get nervous about. And you try to find somebody that their flashlight matches your shadow. So I might find somebody that says too cool for school in their yellow circle. And I say, that's something I'm nervous with. And we talk about it. How do you handle a camper that doesn't like camp? How do you handle a camper that doesn't want to have fun? What's really fascinating about this activity is 2 things happen. One, people that don't feel like they have expertise, their expertise comes out and they feel very proud about it. 2, I have never heard bad advice given during this activity. There's some advice that I've heard that I use in training now today. And that's because most people that put in their yellow circle the camper they're drawn to is the kid that they were when they were younger, and it's the leadership that they need. And so they knew what they needed. Spoiler alert, I was the kid that was kind of hyper. Spoiler alert, I was never the sassy kid. I loved camp, so I didn't understand why those campers didn't like camp. But there's definitely people in that room that match my shadow and my flashlight. So you're building community, and you're giving people that are new to your organization a sense of, I know what I'm doing here. And that is something that's going to help with feeling overwhelmed. We're also helping with time because we're looking at how we can support each other through the summer and carry on that flashlight shadow piece. Last activity, a day in an hour. A lot of staff members are overwhelmed by how much they have to do in a day. I like to do an activity called a day in an hour and make it very, very fun. Basically, it is our camp runs on a bell system. And so every time you have to go to an activity or to a meal, then we have a bell that goes on. So every 4-ish minutes or 5, I can't remember the actual math, a bell would go and staff members had to go to different locations. They were assigned a cabin or a tent, which was their campers. They were assigned activities. They were assigned tables, and they had to do a little something when they went into those spaces. I also have people running around with cameras or phones, so we can record the day and we can put a mini slideshow together and show it the next day, because it's absolutely hilarious. It gets a lot of energy out. There's a lot of laughter, but it really also shows people this is what your day looks like. I find most of the time staff members that are having a hard time with our day is because they didn't truly understand what a day looks like. And camp with kids sometimes feels like 3 days in one day, or feels like a whole day in 1 hour. It's either or. And this allows for that. And then what do we do after we do that day, a day in an hour? We do a little think, pair, share. What part of the day weren't aware you had to be at? What part of the day you were excited about? Share that with a partner. What's something you're worried about? Let's problem solve it. So we can reflect afterwards our day in an hour and get that excitement going. It's also going to show you as the camp professional who's having a hard time, who's having fun, and perhaps addressing that before the actual campers arrive. Now, Beth talked about people being able to reach into their cell phones and, find the information. And I love my cell phone. I'll be honest. We don't have cell phones at Camp Waro, but I really like my cell phone for this act. I also am not very good at remembering things. So about 7-8 years ago, there's that saying of Einstein that if you don't have to remember it, write it down. And I thought, what is the benefit and life lesson of remembering a schedule? And I'm sure for some people there is a benefit, but in a day, in an hour, this is when we give out our pocket counselors to our staff members. They are actually the size, a little bit smaller than a cell phone. They contain our mission, schedules, games, songs, and duty lists, because duties don't happen every single day, so they don't become part of muscle memory. They also have random schedules like opening day and closing day and visitors day. Those are days I can't remember either. Their pocket counselor is part of their uniform. They have to wear it with them. It has a little clip on that also has a flashlight, so it's useful. The most important part of the pocket counselor is that when a counselor comes and asks you a question, you genuinely have to ask, is it in the pocket counselor? Let's look together, not in a condescending way, but in a way to teach them how to use it. And this is something I teach my leadership team members to do, because they actually know the pocket counselor off by heart. I do not. So my answer is quite genuine. I have no idea what's happening at 2. Let's look at your pocket counselor. We have evolved this pocket counselor to be for our counselors in training. We've actually created them for campers. We've created different pages for our leadership team. If you start with 5 pages for everybody, imagine where you're going to be in the next couple of years with your pocket counselor. This is version 17 that I'm showing you right now. But our first pocket counselor was on cardstock. It was black and white, and we cut it by hand. But it was one of the best decisions that we made, because it empowered our staff and it helped them with not feeling overwhelmed. The people that feel overwhelmed at our organizations can be all of our staff members, but sometimes we forget that our new staff members, they see things through different lenses. And so this is my last little suggested activity for all of us, my spot. I would like to suggest that you ask your new staff members to walk around camp after a couple of days that they've been there during staff training and say, hey, this is a really cool, neat spot, and take a picture. Put a slideshow together and have them present each person why they chose this spot on camp and why is it special to them. This is really important because it's a way for them to connect to camp, and it's a way for your returning staff to connect with them. And it's a way for your returning staff to remember why camp is special and that people come from all different places and see things in a different way. Camp can be a special place. For returning staff, sometimes they take things for granted. For new staff, sometimes they're overwhelmed. But instead of having new staff members share all the magical special places at camp, which is important, have your new staff members do that too. This can be a lot, I know that. And with our shift our thinking piece, what's most important is that we don't do it alone and we do what we're able to do. With connecting the dots, just remember our goal is to connect, help our staff connect to themselves, connect to others, and connect to camp, and focus on that. Bring in some alumni to talk about how you want to do that this summer. Ask some of your staff how you want to do that this summer. This is not on your shoulders. In shifting our thinking, if we do that with other people, we're going to teach them how to intentionally think about connections. And that's what we need at camp this summer. Thank you so much, everybody. And we have very couple of minutes for some questions.
Gabs, I think the first question came in the chat a while ago. Folks would like to know what you used to create that presentation.
It's called eCam, and I'm using my iPad on a green screen. Yes, eCam Live, and Cam has 2 M's. Yes. Thank you.
There is also a question in Spanish. Maybe Simone can help us out.
She's asking, Anna Melissa is asking if you can repeat what a pocket counselor contains.
Yes, our mission, our schedules, our duties, or how to do certain duties, songs, and games. But how we built it, the first thing that we did was we asked our first year staff members from the year before, so they were going to become our second year staff members, and we asked them what they wish they would have known in the first week of camp. And that's how we chose what information, and we only had 5 cards, but it came from them. It didn't come from me or people that have been there for many years.
Gabs, do you have meetings with your counselors at their My Spot activity?
I haven't had meetings at the My Spot activity, but that's a really lovely idea. But we do try to have, we do try to have sessions in different spots on camp. And that's something I learned from you and Travis, actually. But that would be a beautiful thing to do. Any other questions? We're good?
All right.
Awesome.
Gabs,
Thanks,
everyone.
One last one. The activity in an hour. What is the debriefing of this?
The debriefing is, so typically we have our new staff members meet together and they talk about, just their experience, what was fun, what was overwhelming, what was confusing. And then they meet with new staff members and they ask all of the questions that they have, returning staff members. Returning staff members are really good at filling in the blanks, and we coach our returning staff members to give camp hacks. So this is what I pack in my knapsack for the day because this helps So our returning staff members can really help with filling in those blanks of the day, but new staff members typically will ask a bunch of questions, and then returning staff members will try to answer them.
I also have one question for Beth now that we have her here. If we did only one thing with our staff this year during training, what would you advise?
I think the most important thing is to build that community of trust. I don't think there's anything more important than that. We can learn about the duties in week 2. We can, help to kind of get those things on board as we go. But if you don't have the trust of the people around you, knowing that they will support you and that they will be there for you when it hits the fan, because it invariably does, then I think we're in trouble. So I would spend so much time in staff training building that community, building that sense of trust, letting people know that they are a part of something really important and special, and helping them to vocalize that, as well as, partake in all those kinds of activities. So for me, definitely it's building community, which we do as camp people anyway. That's just why we're special. It's why people come to us. But I think that that whole aspect of bringing people back in again to a world that has been different for them for the last couple of years, and building that trust is the biggest key issue, because if they don't have that, they're not going to ask the questions. They're not going to let you know that they've made a mistake. They're not going to, move forward with any kind of confidence if they don't have trust in that community.
Yes. And to answer Woody's question about the proud confused / overwhelmed can also be on there. It's not anonymous. They have to put their name. Because we want them to start practicing coming forward. And I want that opportunity to ask them, when were you confused, or when were you overwhelmed? And how can we lessen that gap of time for you to come forward? Staff anonymous is important, but I believe in practicing, actually saying that this is difficult for me, or I'm proud of myself, and doing that in a not too intimidating way with a cue card in the first couple of days.
And I would also front load that with this is who will be reading those cards, so that they know that it will be Gabs or a member of the leadership team, but it's not out for everybody to see.
That's correct.
There's also a question from Anna. How many days do you train the new staff, and what are the topics of the training?
That's a good question. There's a lot of topics, and I think every camp is unique. We try to bring in returning staff first, and then new staff second, which could be a little not conventional, but the reason why is we want to set up our returning staff to be good support systems for our new staff. But our training this year, we have added days and hours before camp because of trust, and that we need to build trust. And so our staff training is approximately 8 days.
There is another question about the shifts and the schedule that you recommend or have.
Which part what are your typical working shifts and schedules? Oh, okay, I see. For us, we start in the morning with a staff meeting and wake up our campers, and then put our campers to bed. Our staff members typically have approximately an hour to 2 hours a day off, and a day off a week. I just want to thank Beth for joining us today. And I want to say that, Jorgi, you have 20 minutes for your session, or 15 minutes and 5-minute questions. You can go a little longer if you want. I did.
I'm happy to just have you folks talk more. How tremendous that was, shifting our thinking. On page 4 of my 30 pages of notes, Beth said we need to shift our thinking. And on page 17, Gabs indicated some changes in our actions. And neither of them said, and I think we can be happy for this, that we will ever shift our objectives. We are shifting our thinking. We may need to shift our actions, but our objectives are the same, aren't they? Caring environment where we can build trust and provide enough support and safety to staff that they can do the same thing for their children. So it just makes sense that if we can close the gap and provide shared experiences amongst the staff, that we can build that team that can do the same thing for our staff, or pardon me, for our campers. I'm going to take these, I'm going to take 17 3/4 minutes to talk about top training tips. And the idea here, and I bumped into this line, if you don't debrief, it didn't happen, in many different locations. And I like it because it suggests that we really need to make our choices with intention. We need to know why we are choosing this game over that game, this action over that action, and what our end point is. What is our goal in choosing an activity? And can we help the participants understand more about themselves and about camp through the activity? So I asked some camp directors to help me, a lot like we're doing now, but this was in the old days. And we'll go to the next slide. The ask was this. The ask was, I asked them, Simon, if we could go to the next slide, please. The ask was this. I reached out to a number of different camp directors and asked them about their staff training and in-service training. And I said, what is the must do? What do you always do every year? Or what do you really value? And this was in the old days. I mean, this was envelopes and writing and stamps. Now we could do it in many different ways, like this academy or social media or other ways. But even then, I got back 24 responses, and the camp directors loved to share the things that work for them, just as we're doing here. And this is a method that we should continue to think about as we go forward. What questions could we ask and pool the answers? But let's focus back on staff training. Next. So of the 24 answers, they all sort of fell into different categories. And I'm going to do a very quick review of the categories. And don't panic that you can't read this, because there is the full handout of everything you see on the right-hand side of this screen that we can provide to you. So the different activities fell into different, as I say, categories. So the first being role play. What can we do to help staff understand a little bit more about the big picture? And could we help them perhaps create a brochure to describe camp to new families? Could we help them, could we give them a chance to staff a fictional switchboard where other staff pretend they're parents and call in with concerns and have the staff respond as the director to those kinds of situations? Or could we take our camp display and set it up and invite new staff to stand in front of that camp display and explain camp to visiting families as they stop by at the camp fair? So we get to focus in on the camp philosophy, on why we are having camp at all, and also the fact that we represent camp in everything that we do. and we are part of the contract that camp makes with parents. Next. So there are plenty of games and exercises, and these games and activities focus on communication, collaboration, and how groups function. The grid exercise is an exercise where the actions lead us down a competitive route, when in fact we can all win if we take a more cooperative route. And so we discuss communication and have a lot of fun doing these exercises. Next. Special routines. I love Gab's camp day in an hour. We have a back to basics camp day described here in this handout, and a breakfast club where people meet every morning before breakfast and have some specific activities that relate to camp. And one camp sent their world famous intergalactic working together game that builds community and invites the camp experience to be shared by all and to be understood by all. And then as the team comes together, it is a super opportunity to prepare for the next part of our camp staff training. Next. Sit down discussions. Pair share is fantastic, Gabs, and all three of these activities involve very little on the front end, but allow experienced staff and new staff to meet together to swap ideas. What are some camper problems? How do you deal with some problem campers? How do you develop a full value contract so that everybody can sign on to it? And what are some sticky situations, some difficulties that might arise on our out trips or in various places? And can we discuss what our reactions would be? Number one, how do we avoid those sticky situations? And number two, how do we act upon them in an effective way? So the experienced staff informs the actions of all. The next one is STEAM, being science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, but just basically using things to build stuff and have some fun together. Part of camp, even during your staff training, should be a positive experience and a really fun, engaging time. So let's make some trash balls. Everybody gets a trash ball, and you can play a number of different exercises with it. Preserving the egg, the egg being the camper, and having it drop from a height. What can we do to work together? The first time I ever did this activity, it also involved an auction in which you had no materials, but you had to do some activities in order to earn some pretend money, in order to allow you to bid at an auction, in order to obtain some specific materials that you think might help protect the egg. Ton of fun. And the bowl full of cherries, let's build a giant ice cream sundae. On to the next one. I love metaphors and visual pieces, as you'll see a little bit later on. I just experienced one recently, and I want to share with you. But barriers to communication, we know they exist. Can we define each one? And as we suggest each one, let's take a physical block, maybe not a full brick, but something that looks like a brick, and put it between the facilitator and the group, and slowly the wall builds up until we realize that we cannot communicate because we can't connect. And then how do we break down, how do we dismantle that wall over the course of our staff training in order to be an effective team? Take a rope and lie a rope down halfway, or split your group in half with a rope or a line, and immediately we create an us them mentality. How can we work to eliminate that us them, or pardon me, our us them, our us them mentality? On to the next one. Initiatives, a ton of group initiatives, and these will be, some of these will be familiar to some of you, but there are other ones here as well. Anytime a group works together, they have a shared experience. That shared experience closes a gap. There are any number of activities that you can do in order to improve communication, cooperation, and strategies for transfer from the activity we are doing now to the ones we'll be doing in the summer. Next. Beth is a big fan, I know, of recognitions and affirmations, ways to let people know that they are seen, that they are appreciated, and that they are part of a community that cares about them too. And so identifying on any given day of staff training the great moment, or at the end of a typical day in the summertime when you have a staff meeting, what was the great moment in camping that you witnessed today? And it allows people to pat other people on the back. Next. So I know Ursula is here, and if you were at last year's academy, or last episode of the academy, you know that we went on a camp tour of Santa Ursula Camp Santa Ursula in Mexico. I was blessed with an opportunity just 2 weeks ago to travel to Mexico and to actually participate in the Mexican Camping Association's camp training, their staff training. And we went, can you believe it, to Camp Santa Ursula. And Ursula was a great host. And the theme for the program was Engranando Mentes. And next will show us the next, Simon, thank you. The theme, Engranando Mentes, is engaging minds, meshing. And part of this is because Santa Ursula, one of their activities is go-kart racing, which is incredibly fun. But a team of staff needs to work together like a well-oiled machine. And so the gears, each of us needs to link together to have, in order for us to be successful. Next. And so here's a whirlwind, and there are hundreds of pictures if you want to come and see my personal slideshow, but basically this is it. Camps from all across Mexico arrived as a group. They did some warm-up activities with the Santa Ursula staff, and then they were divided into teams, into groups that consisted of members of different camps. They didn't know each other before, but by the end of the day, they certainly did. And as they traveled to each station on a pretty tight schedule, only 15 minutes of speaking, Gabs, you'll be happy to know, and then we were on to other things. Some of them were sit-down sessions, and others were activities at the camp. But everywhere they went, they collected these white wooden gears, and the gears were collected by each of the teams. And if we go on to the next slide, then you'll see why. Here, placed at the end of the day, were all of these gears, each with the names of the camps, the names of individuals, the hopes and dreams for the summer, their goals, their objectives, and they were all placed up onto this incredible wall that the staff at Campus Santa Ursula had made. And then the directors who were there, all supporting their staff, all came over and pushed a giant plunger. And Simon can trigger what I hope is a little video. Yes, it all worked. And some Latin energy like you would not believe. Then a little dance fest, and we all headed back to our various camps. Now, this session was actually billed as a two-part session, one being the session that Gabrielle and Beth would do, and the other would be all camp games. And I did promise you some all camp games. Many of these activities that I just shared with you and are available in a handout, those things could be adapted into your summer camp. But I wanted to share some additional ones before we have any Q&A. So Simon, one more slide, please. So 4 all camp games. This is a Parloff relay. A Parloff relay means paired running. And you can see the 12 stations that are around the outside of a large circle, 4 different colored teams. And the thing that I like about a Parloff relay is that at each of those stations, you can decide any number of station descriptions, and they can have whatever focus or purpose you would like to have. They might be very athletic events, they might be land-based events, they might be water-based events, they might be some combination of land and water. And you can decide what gets done at each of the stations, but groups would arrive at the station and do an activity. But the neat thing is that only one group, oh, this is so hard to explain without reading. The yellow group goes to station 2 and does the activity at station 2, while the green group goes to station 5 and does it at station 5 and 8 and 11. And then they each advance by 1. So the baton goes around the circle many times while all the campers and staff go around the circle once. So you're watching others, you're playing together, you're spending time together, a great all camp activity. And the next slide, please, are 3 more activities. And so these handouts that are available are for large groups and they're camp-wide games. One is tag-based, another is group tag-based, and the third one is group strategy, a team strategy in which you move your team to different parts of the game playing area in a very creative way. So prisoners base, color chaos, and possession. So those 4 handouts are all available to you, and I am at your service. So if Alexia could include my contact information, I'm happy to follow up at any time to explain anything in more detail. The last slide, I think, says, if you need help, just ask. And there we go.
Thank you so much, Jorgi. That's wonderful. And the resource is truly a treasure chest of gold nuggets. So wonderful. Do we have any questions for Jorgi? I know we got a lot of, this is amazing in the chats. I have a question. I was going to say, oh, sorry, Jorgi, go for it.
I just wanted to say how amazing that wall of gears was in
that was going to be my question. So they have, I mean, I don't even know, how does it work?
Well,
that was fantastic.
I mean, a very quick explanation is that there was just a motor that was driving one of the gears. And what you didn't see was, like all camp activities, the bad guy came and stole one of the gears at the beginning of the day.
Yes.
And so it was never going to work until he recognized that staff working together at camp just meant that he had to do his part. And so he returned that all important gear, which just happened to have the Mexican Camp Association logo on it, and placed it into place. And that was the gear that was attached to the motor behind. And so when it turned, they all turned.
They had so many camps have that person with that brain on camp.
Well, they had quite a team there at that camp.
That's impressive. That's so amazing. Thank you so much. I'd like to end with Kate's question, which is, how did you get so awesome? And I also want to know.
It's hanging around and listening to people like you and Beth.
Oh, thank you so much, Jorgi. Really appreciate it. And thank you to Beth as well for joining us today at ICF Academy. For everybody that was able to participate live, thank you for your energy in the chats. And for those of you that are watching this post our recording, we appreciate the views, and we appreciate the following and commenting on our social media. This is signing off, Gabs with Alexia and Simone behind the scenes. If you would like, Simone, you can put on the last little slide. We also have an ICF YouTube channel that has a couple of videos that are up right now called ICC Bite Size, and it is something to help you understand a little bit more about the Congress that is happening in Spain in October. And right now it's Alexia and I flexing our hosting muscles. We'd also love to hear from you. This is our feedback link with our wonderful Gwen Powell, who could not join us today, but we felt her in spirit. Feedback helps us in creating these shows. And our goal is to make the world a better place through camp, and your feedback helps with that. So thanks again, everybody. Here's our ICC 2023 QR code that you can look at, and we'd love to see you in Spain. It's truly the experience for camp professionals, the one that just fills your cup, and just wonderful to be around people that do what we do from around the world. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.